Thank you, Dan. I'd operate down there, but a few folk have requested that we video this because they can't be here, and so field division is about here. A couple of things before I start, and that is serious, people. As you can imagine, when you go into somebody's home and you walk inside the door, and you'll see paintings and pot plants and things, you get a certain feel for the home. There's something about how you feel about that house, and it can be an older house or a brand new house, but it's got a certain feel to it. It's a bit the same with churches. And as I travel around and go to different churches, you'd understand each church has a kind of unique feel, and some churches you walk and you think, this feels a little chilly in here, you know. And it's not the temperature. You just everybody's kind of staid and formal, and it's nice. But then you go to churches where you just feel incredibly welcome. And just last Sabbath I was in Ponsonby in New Zealand. And for those of you who know Ponsonby, there's a lot of island folk there, and they have some wonderful traditions. And I was greeted by, put the nose on the nose, which was kind of cute. That was a guy. But I've never been hugged and kissed so many times after a sermon as I did last Sabbath. That Ponsonby was just fabulous and just so warm, loving people. I want you to know, this is my third time here at mine, and you guys have something incredibly special here. And my wife and I were just standing outside there, and she said, I'd love to come to this church. So, she's fairly cold, scary person. No, she's gorgeous, but that was just off the, there was no primed or anything, and it's true. You guys have got something incredibly special here. The way you just all get in, and I mean scones and jam and cream at Sabbath school. Now, what you guys do is just I commend you for your sense of inclusion and taking care of each other. So I just want to share that with you. To kick off, what I'd like to do this afternoon is share with you as much as I can research. And someone mentioned, thank you for the last time I was here, we did some marriage stuff, which was a blast. That was a load of fun, and thank you for that was a load of fun. And nice married couple here at the front. You guys just can't settle there. No holding knees, right? That was fun, and that's somewhat distracting. Just holding his knee. Give me a minute. Just looks so natural. That was a lot of fun, so maybe we do that again. But today we're going to look at this whole area of raising a spiritually minded family. And again, I'd like to share with you some research, not just what I think, but what's the research saying. And there'll be a little bit of pulling again, I guess, a little bit of what we shared with you this morning, and hopefully find it helpful. And I'd like to kick off by sharing with you a story that emerges out of the Old Testament. And if you want to look up, it's in Nehemiah, but let me tell you the story. Nehemiah was a guy who was in Jerusalem, and the king in Babylon decided that he'd like some Jerusalem people in his kingdom. So the king did what kings did back in those days. He got his army, and they went in and they just grabbed all these people out of Jerusalem and carted them off to Babylon. And that happened on a number of occasions. Jerusalem was taken by Babylonian kings a number of times. And at this particular time, I remember it was Artaxerxes, he went down and brought these guys over to Babylon, to Susa. And it's strange, but Nehemiah becomes a drink bearer to the king. Now, I find that intriguing. How come a Jerusalem, taken by force, comes to Babylon, and he's a drink bearer to the king? How does he get that job? Surely that should be a Babylonian's job. Well, I was chatting about this. Someone recently thought about the bit that maybe the king didn't trust his own people, because they sort of wiped each other out fairly regularly. So maybe he thought, if I get a Jerusalem person and they have to drink the wine first and taste it, doesn't matter if he dies, I can get plenty more. Who knows? But for some reason, Nehemiah, and I think maybe someone was in charge here. Anyway, Nehemiah is a drink bearer to the king. One day, Hananiah, Nehemiah's brother, and I think it was his blood brother, turns up from Jerusalem with some of his friends to come and visit Nehemiah. And Nehemiah turns to his brother Hananiah and says, Hananiah, what's happening back in Jerusalem? He loves his city. And Hananiah tells him the story. He said the walls are wrecked, the city's a disaster, the gates have been burnt, the place is a disaster, and we're embarrassed. Well, Nehemiah is so upset that he says he prays and he fasts for days. And he prays this fabulous prayer. And then he, someone's phone there, is it? No, it's on. And he prays this fabulous prayer. And there's this really neat verse, and it says, Nehemiah had never been sad before the king before. He'd never been, it's interesting. And he goes before the king, and the king says, this is a Babylonian king. He says to Nehemiah, Nehemiah, this sadness, this is not sickness, this must be sadness of heart. Cop that. A Babylonian king. And he looks at Nehemiah and he says, this sadness, this isn't sadness due to sickness, this must be sadness of heart. And I think, wow, wouldn't it be fabulous if you and I could be that quick to pick up sadness of heart? And often we see people, we say, oh, you must be sick. And we pick up sickness, but do we always pick up sadness of heart? And I thought that was just, here's this Babylonian king, he's a Jerusalem bloke, this must be sadness of heart. He says, what's wrong? Well, Nehemiah tells him the story. He says, well, my city's in ruins, it's a mess. The king says, what do you want? I want to go back and fix it. Away you go. So he gives him letters of authority, gives him support, and Nehemiah goes back to repair the city. And in verse 17, I think of chapter 2. Yep, we've got it up on the screen. This is what happens. Oh, sorry, I jumped a verse. Let's do this verse. Let's do this verse. This is out of Deuteronomy, because this is our key verse today. I missed it on my paper here. These commandments that I give you today, this is not Nehemiah, right? This is Deuteronomy. These commandments that I give you today be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Don't you love that verse? So that's our key verse for the day. Lucky I remembered it. Yeah, anyway. So that's our verse for today. All right? Let's go back to Nehemiah. So Nehemiah gets all the guys and he says this. Then I've said to them, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins. So he goes back, gets all the key Jerusalem people who are still there, and he says this. And its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. We'll no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. So he tells the people, this is what the king did, and he's given us all this stuff, let's go. And notice the people said, yeah, let's start rebuilding. So they began this good work. So here's this picture, Nehemiah is sad, and he goes back and he starts rebuilding. Well, it's fascinating because what he did, he got families and people groups involved in rebuilding the wall. And I just want to share with you one little group. Jediah, son of that person, made repairs opposite his house, and Hattush, son of that person, made repairs next to him. Malchijah, son of Haram, and Hashub, son of that person, repaired another section in the Tower of the Ovens. Got some fascinating names. Shalom, son of Halahesh, ruler of a half-district Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. Yay, go the girls. That's not fabulous. So it's this picture of everybody's in there rebuilding this wall. And it says the jewellers got together and rebuilt a section and so, and they repaired the sheep gate and such a gate, the fish gate, even the dung gate. Sorry people, but it's in the scriptures, they repaired the dung gate, which reminds us that everything you and I have to repair gates in our lives that we'd rather not talk about, but it's true, we have to repair the tough spots. But they repaired all of that. And it's really interesting. Anyway, there's a couple of guys who start getting a bit shirty and getting a bit sore about the fact that this wall's being rebuilt. And Tobiah was one of them, and Sanballat the Horonite, and they start having a crack at Nehemiah and the builders. Oh, look, what are you doing? We're building the wall. If even a fox walks on that wall, it'll fall down. And they really start giving rhubarb to Nehemiah and his workers. Well, Nehemiah does something smart. He says, therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials and the rest of the people, remember the Lord who is great and also saying, fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. Now, there's verse 2 for today. Check that out. Nehemiah says, hey, and he gets these people in the exposed places with families. And then from then he says, remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. People, you and I, as family members, are in exposed places. The walls that we've known for many years that have been a kind of a solid place for families, for a lot of people are crumbling. And I mentioned this morning, for a lot of world leaders, they're worried about the way we do family these days, the way families struggle, the crisis and stress for families. And when I read that verse, it just leapt off the page to me. And he says, fight for your family. Now, I'm not going to advocate swords, spears and bows. That's what they used back in those days. This is not about standing with our families in some neighbourhood with a double-barrel shotgun, although sometimes you might be tempted. This is about being intentional about our families. There's this little saying you've heard, a dead fish floats with the stream. It's the live one that swims against the current. You and I don't do family by default. You and I don't do family by just hoping something will happen. This is intentional. And I want to encourage us to fight for our families. Fight for our brothers, our sons, our daughters. I don't have time to share with you statistics. If you want a really neat study, there's a study that just came out in July last year called For Kids' Sake. It was by Dr. Patrick Parkinson. You might have seen him on telly, featured. He put a paper together called For Kids' Sake. And he has advocated 12 key major points for governments. And I'm going to share with you one in just a jiff, just one. But he shares some statistics. And I presented this in a sermon just recently, and I said I think we should have a moment's silence for men. The statistics for men aren't real pretty. I think 80% more of jail population are men. Men live 6 years on average less than women across the board. Serious, men are in trouble. Okay. Then he gives statistics about boys, and he gives statistics about girls, and people, they're not pretty statistics. And he calls for desperate, he says, we've got to do something about our families, and it's just a fabulous paper. I encourage you to have a look at it. It's called For Kids' Sake. Just type it in Google and it'll come up and you can read it. We don't have time to look at it today. But it's just a powerful statement about what we need to do for kids. And then I show you this verse. This is what Nehemiah says. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in other words, build and protect. And what Nehemiah didn't do is, well, let's just protect ourselves here. Let's just protect ourselves. And the walls stay crumbling. Nor did he say, well, let's just rebuild the walls, and left his people vulnerable. Anything of value that you and I build, we'll always want to protect. Build and protect. And I commend that image too for our families. We build them and we protect them. So we've got to find neat strategies of doing that. How do we build our families, and how at the same time do we protect them? If we're overprotective, the research is clear as a bell, we'll have kids that struggle later on in years. If we don't protect them enough, they'll also be vulnerable. So we've got this challenge of finding this neat middle road of building and protecting. But I commend that image too, because I think it's just a really neat message for us today. Then there's a neat one in Paul, where Paul, I think, gave some really neat words for us as parents. He says, for you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting and urging you to live lives worthy of God who calls you to his kingdom of glory. So there's three things: encouraging, comforting and urging you to live lives worthy of God. There it is. Three nifty things that you and I can do as parents for our kids: encouraging, comforting and urging. So that urging, they're all verbs. They're all verbs of action. Encourage. How do we encourage our kids? We comfort them, and some of us do that better than others. And then we urge them to change. And I thought that was, again, a neat little biblical image of what today is about. All right, sometimes you and I forget how important we are as parents, especially to our adolescents, because our adolescents, our teenagers, let us know that we're just the worst parents in the world. And I remember Mum and Dad, I don't know what happened to them when I was a teen. Gee, they lost a lot of knowledge. I don't know what happened, but they were just, they knew nothing. And then about 22, 23, I was surprised how they turned back around. Old adolescent years are dumb, crazy years, aren't they? Oh, what would you know? You know, mum and dad are just the most ignorant, stupid, hopeless people on the earth. Then you'd have to sit about 2023. That's amazing how they come back together. And they did a survey of over 250,000 teens. 70% of them identified their parents as the most important influence in their lives. Right? Only 21% rated peers in this way, but we always think, well, you know, for the teens, their peers, the research is otherwise. Certainly for that 250,000, right? Their parents are the most important influence in their lives. Right? But here's another tricky now. There's only a small study. They did a study, and they said the study revealed that teens spend less than 7% of their waking hours with any adults, while spending approximately half their time with their peers. So do you see the problem here? 250,000 teens, 70% identified their parents as the most important influence in their life. Now again, this other study was a small study, but it was interesting. They spend less than 7% with not only their parents, but any adults. Right? So mum and dad really count. I just don't spend time with them. Or is that mum and dad really count, but they're never around? I don't know, the study didn't tell us that. But I think it's really important. And even though our teens let us know, mum, you, dad, you guys don't know anything, the amazing is they still count. So you and I can't afford to write off, you know, our adolescent years. Well, we don't really play an important role in our kids' lives as you do. They just may not let you know. Okay? And the important thing is they've got to spend time with them. That's clear. Check this one. This is Mark DeVries. I quoted him this morning. Great little book called Family-Based Youth Ministry. There is overwhelming evidence that parents are almost always the single most determining factor in the development of their children. Right? Clear research. So let's not write off our influence as parents. We play a very important role in with our kids. And the quote that I shared with you this morning we'll put up again. Parents who simply talk about their faith in the home and to involve their teens in serving alongside them can actually double and sometimes even triple their children's chances of living out their faith as an adult. Let's just make a comment here, and then you'll see where I'm going. Mark DeVries and some of his cohorts have done a lot of research in youth ministry, and particularly in the US. And there's a real shift now. Because what they've recognised is that a lot of kids, and someone was chatting to me about this morning, I think Greg and I were commenting on it, a lot of kids who, you know, are our kids are a part of our church now. But we notice that when they move out of the teen youth days, they kind of goodbye to the church. And I haven't shared a whole lot of stats here, but that happens across the board. And what they've recognised is, and I think particularly for larger churches, we establish youth ministry for our kids, right? And that was important. And what we said is, come over here, let's separate you from them, come over here and we'll do youth ministry, we'll have this fabulous youth program, and we'll run all these fabulous youth, we'll do campings and ski trips and all this terrific thing, yay! What they discovered was when the kids moved out of the youth program that was their church, they didn't relate to the sort of adult church that they'd come out of. Because it wasn't their church. And so if the youth leader moved on or something changed or they moved out of the youth years, right, they kind of didn't have that connection. And it was called silo ministry, the silo ministry. And so we got this youth ministry here, and you know, what we call Sabbath school, which was great. We got all the kids there and all our different divisions, which was wonderful. But if that's the only thing we have, we're putting our kids at risk. That's the research emerging now. And let me just share a little bit more on that. Here's Dr. Patrick Parkinson's study. And he said programs on parent-child relationship address the importance of a healthy relationship between the parents for the well-being of the children. So the research is coming through clear as a bell that the parent-child relationship is still the strongest relationship for not only mental, psychological, physical health for kids, but relational, spiritual journeying as well. Okay? The federal government should establish a families commission to coordinate the work of the government in strengthening family relationships. Bless him. Dr. Patrick Parkinson, Sydney Uni professor. So what he's saying is governments need to be aware that what we need to do is desperately strengthen families for kids' sake, right? Because that's where they're going to find the real strength. And I think that's just so valuable to know. Now, I mentioned to you this morning about the Hardwired to Connect study. Can I just go back to that? And I'll share with you a statement. This was a mental health study. And I mentioned to you this morning, the mental health study was a concern. It emerged out of a concern about the at-risk behaviour of adolescents in the US, depression, anxiety, suicide, etc. In the US, depression levels for adolescents is at the same level in which their parents were hospitalised for. Right? So depression is just huge in the States, also here in Australia. Depression, anxiety. And they were really concerned. As I said to you, they got this commission together and they came up with a variety of answers and recommendations. But what they largely said is that kids of today have lost their connections. They've lost connections with the community, with family. And I was talking to one of the guys after church here. In Western society, and this is my own feeling, my own thinking, we've honoured the nuclear family. That's the Western family, right? So it's mum, dad and 2.5 kids. That's kind of family. That's what do we define family. So grandma and grandpa are kind of family, but usually we'd say, well, that's grandma and grandpa. We sort of include them in our thinking, but the description of family, the way I've understood it, was that they weren't really there. That's quite different to when I go out to Samoa and Fiji and Tonga and the Cook Islands, Pacific Islands, family. How big do you want it? You know, and so they talk about the one talks and families. It creates its problems, but family's huge. And some of you will be familiar with that. So when you mention family for some of other cultures, they would never understand family to be just mum and dad and the kids. That would never be. It's grandma, grandpa, uncles, aunties, sisters, everybody's in this. This is what family means. I think that's a healthier picture of family. Now, it creates some problems. When I was talking to one of our ministry leaders in Fiji, and he said one of the issues over there is because in our culture, again, a father a man or the woman will leave their father and mother and cling to their partner and become one. That leaving, we leave in order to cleave, and the research is we don't always cleave well if we don't leave well. That's an issue in the islands because of money situations. They'll go and live with either parents or the extended family, so everybody's in there telling them how to do marriage and raising their kids. You know, so it's got its flip side, but that sense of connection is just so real and so incredibly valuable. And I think we as a Western culture, with our emphasis on a smaller family, as soon as that family breaks down, then you have very, very small connections. You have far less connections, and I think that leaves us at risk. And the Hardwired Connect study, among a number of recommendations, and they said we desperately need to build facilitative communities, participative communities, but he said we need a new model focused on promoting the healthy development of children and youth by surrounding all our children with a network of nurturing, supportive relationships. So one of the things that emerged clearly out of this study among several, one is there was this desperate need to build connections for kids. I was sharing with someone this morning, John Duffy, some of you know John Duffy, ADRA director, he did that cycling trip, Circle of Courage, and he particularly had his area of interest was drug and alcohol, and he said very clearly, he said the research and our own experience, and that's his and his groups, was that when they went into country towns across Australia and they did education programs on drug and alcohol for teenagers, there was no measurable shift in drug and alcohol usage after they did their workshops. In fact, all it really did was gave the kids a better knowledge of how to, they become better educated drug and alcohol users. You know, I know all about this stuff, I'll keep using it. The only shift they noticed was when significant town people in these small towns went down to the skate park and learnt these kids' names. They learnt the kids' names and spent time with these kids. That's when they noticed shifts, measurable shifts in attitudes to less usage of drug and alcohol. So there's a number of studies that are all sort of coming together and saying the same thing, that when adults immerse themselves in kids' lives, that's where change comes. Right? Now let me just tell a bit more. Here's another statement by Mark DeVry. Everything we do in our youth ministry should be first and foremost about helping to give kids excuses to build connections with Christian adults. So we're moving away from this kind of separatist thinking, if you like. Bringing youth and adolescents and teens, come over here and we'll do this separate youth ministry, because what we're discovering is it's not working. I mean, that's fabulous for the kids, but we still need to sustain and maintain these connections with adults. So all we're saying here is that, hey, the research is showing that we as parents have a huge role to play in our kids' lives. Adults have a huge role to play in their lives. Now let's have a look at this next one. Greg Johnson and Mike Yorkie did some research, and they got a whole lot of this is discouraging on one hand, because the stuff that we're talking about, how do we transfer faith to our kids? And so they had all these adults who actually had sustained their faith through their childhood years into adolescence and into sort of adult years. And they interviewed all those people, and they said, look, let's see if we can find what's the factor, what's the one ingredient that we say, yay, if we've got this, our kids will go into the faith. Brace yourselves. They found nothing. They didn't really find, here's Formula A or here's tab A that fits in slot B and you're guaranteed. It just didn't happen. What they discovered, and they said almost by default, was this. While we didn't come up with a surefire formula, one thing was obvious. Those who stuck with their faith had a half dozen mentors present during their growing up years. Yay. Okay? I think that's vital. So what they discovered was that there was no set formula that was obvious. My guess is it's multifaceted. If I asked each of you, how come you're here today as a Christian believer? And that is, I'm assuming you came through as a child. And what brought you here? My guess is, and it's going to be multifaceted answers. But it will be interesting can you think back when you were a kid, who played a key role in your life? Because my guess that's going to be true. And I can think back to my life as a young kid, growing up as I called myself a nappy Christian, right? A nappy Seventh-day Adventist. The day I sat up for the first time by myself, without anybody holding me, was the day my mum and dad were baptised into the Adventist church. My mum came from a Methodist church. My dad was a strong Baptist. So the Christian thing was very powerfully part of it. But I'm in nappies, so I've been around for a long time, right? And I can look back on my childhood days and I can think of several people who were kind of there. They weren't in my face, but they were there as key players. And so I just wish you, I took a presentation on this recently somewhere, and I said to the folk, look, for the grandparents, if you're a grandparent here, you might feel, my parenting days are over. No, they ain't. So if you're a grandparent, you've got a huge role to play in a church. If you no longer have children, you've got a fabulous role to play right here at Mile End, because kids need mentors. Right? And you can play a really neat role in just being there for these people, and just being in the background. What's your name, son? How's your skateboard going? How's school going? True? Wow, that's exciting. And that role that you play can be huge, right? Exciting stuff. All right, let's have a look. To an early adolescent, you are their Bible. Your lived out theology, how you talk about people, faith, politics, money or church, will be the word that your child will study and learn from the most. The old adage, Christianity is not taught so much as it is caught, is never truer than during early adolescence. Now, Chap and D. Clark are currently the kind of recognises most of some of the current researchers in youth ministry. So they remind us, attitudes are caught, not taught. We pick up things. And I think that's a neat thing to remember. Because the way you and I talk about politics and everyday life stuff will have an impact on the kids about the rest of life. Okay. Another little interesting study, a paediatrician. She is a mother of 5, and she's an author of a book called Dr. Mum's Parenting Guide. Her name's Marianne Nefford. She says this: kids are innate spiritual beings. We hinted at this morning. They're especially interested in how things are created and are very receptive to the idea of a God they can't see. Right? So when we think about transferring faith, we're almost a little bit discouraged here because, according to some research, there's no real set formula, but there are things you and I can do. But let's remember that we can't do it alone. We need support. And all of us can play this really neat role in being like your Mile in Churchy. I think would be a powerful model of what it is to journey together in carrying our kids and picking up the values that you and I treasure and love. Right? The idea of being mindful of others, of being, tender and caring and thoughtful and respectful. All those values that we treasure, how do we pass them on? We do it together as a shared journey. There's a bit of a thing called orange, not Agent Orange, kind of Think Orange at the moment, where yellow that's the one. Think Orange. She's got the book right there. Right? Hold it up. I'll just wave the book. All right. Right, it's reminding us that this journey of spiritual growth is a joint journey between home and church. And I know a lot of youth workers get a bit frustrated when mum and dad or dad drops off the kids at the youth Friday night, says, there's my kids, and they dart off and don't get involved. Well, the church is going to raise my kids and make him a spiritual person. I can't, so the church will. It's not going to really happen, because it's a joint journey. And Think Orange is made of 2 red primary colours, red and yellow, and red represents the blood of family, yellow the church. It's cute, it's a great idea, and I think it's very, very valuable because this is a shared journey. Right, so there's a bit of help here that I want to share with you 12 things that, while we recognise these aren't guarantees, right, but they are ways in which you and I can have a part in journeying with our kids and developing some spiritual life. And the first one is introduce spirituality early on. I always get a bit nervous about parents, and I've heard them say, well, I'm not going to do anything about my faith for my kids, I'll just let them decide for themselves. Well, the tricky thing is you decide out of options, right? If you don't give them options, then what do I choose from? You could give them some options, right? By introducing spiritual practices early on, such as lighting candles or singing songs together, your child will view them as a natural part of life, and you'll have a spiritual influence on him before other people do. Kids are going to hear about God all over, and if it says if you don't put your own spin on it with your own values, they'll absorb someone else's. And I saw this, I didn't include here, I should have, but I saw this little thing in a book recently. It was a statement of a drug dealer, and he wrote this note, or he explained to this parent. He said, I was there when you as a parent weren't. And he's talking about how he introduced drugs to this kid, and the message was kind of, Mum and Dad, you weren't there, but I was there. And that's pretty tough. But this concept of, I was talking to someone who about absent dads. But some good news. 20 years, 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was a lot of concern in the research about absent fathers, and there was doctoral degrees and all sorts of things about absent dads. And there's this sort of thing, well, raising kids is for mumsies. That's mum's turf. I'm the one outside. I'll fix the house and, mow the lawn. But the kids, nappies, a little bit, but, And of course, it was. Even at hospital, when our firstborn was born, I had to stand at the head of where Cara was, and that was innovative. Dads just weren't involved. I remember as a young boy going and visiting little babies, and there's all the mum, but dads, they had to wait outside. You'd see the old movies, dads pacing up and down, wondering what's happening there. Dad in a birthing suite, horrors! How disgusting is that? It just wasn't part of thinking. And slowly, more and more, dads got involved to the degree that when my son was born, I was beside the doctor cracking jokes. Cara wasn't real happy about that. And we were making comments about all sorts of things, and Carol was working terribly hard. I was quite relaxed, but I was in there. That's the thing now, right? And there was a lot of concern, rightful concern, about absent fathers. good news, both in the States and Australia, there is a measurable difference. There's been a swing. More and more fathers are being inversed now in parenting. Yeah, it's exciting. I think it's fabulous. So much higher percentage now of fathers are involved in the parenting thing. In the birth thing. They're in the birthing room, but also fathers immersed in parenting. And I think that's exciting. The other thing that's shifting, and it's not here in my notes, but I just remembered it. I think one of the crises we have for our Western society is that we don't have what I call markers, rites of passage. Let me ask you a question. When does a boy become a man in Australia? When does a girl become a woman? We see the Aboriginal culture got smart. Some of the island cultures, they had a sort of a marker, a ceremony. And an Aboriginal boy had to go out and kill a kangaroo or something, but it wasn't for him. He had to take it back to the village and share it with the family. He's a man. Right? A Jewish boy, when he was 12, bar mitzvah, he's a man. Let me tell you a sad story about that. Karen and I were in the US and we went to the Museum of Tolerance. If you ever want a fabulous experience in LA, go to the Museum of Tolerance. And you walk in, you go through a thingo like you do at the airport to make sure you haven't got any metalware, weapons and stuff. And then you go in and they talk about, and there's big posters and banners. And at that stage it was Idi Amin and a whole of others. And then they take you into this room. And the girl says, I'm going to leave you now. It's a self-led tour. And she walks out, shuts the door, and it's pitch black. Seriously, you cannot see there. And then this light comes on, and it's a bit like, those of you know the Canberra War Memorial, where those little display windows. It was just like that. And this voice comes over, and there's a sort of what is he? He's philosopher, historian, and something else. And there's three guys that take you through the tour. The light goes out, and there's the next stage, and it tells the story of the rise of Hitler and how he came to power. There's this really neat little restaurant scene. And there's this, it's very cleverly done, all in 3D, just miniature, but there's this little table and there's wine glasses and half-finished wine and knives and forks, and you hear the clunk and the sound of eating. And there's a Jewish girl and a German girl talking. This Jewish girl's expressing her fear of the build-up of sort of anti-Semitism, and this German girl says, no, you've got nothing to worry about, just powerfully portrays the story. And it goes right through until you come to a gate that's the replica of the gate to Auschwitz. And you put a little card in a computer and it tells a story of a little boy or girl who was taken. And that's about halfway through. At the end, you put your card in and it tells you the rest of the story, how this little boy or girl died. It's incredibly moving. Anyway, at the end of it, this announcement said, if you'd like to hear a survivor of Auschwitz, go to theatre such as... I nearly ran. I felt really moved. This sweet little short Jewish lady. She must have been, 70s, 80. And there was a group of, I suppose, 60, 80 people in this room, and she told her story. And with tissues and tears, she told a story how she was an 18-year-old girl. The truck came to her home, grabbed her father, her mother, her and a 12-year-old brother, Jewish, put them in this truck and carted them off to the train. And she describes that train journey that you and I see on movies, and it was just serious. It's just overwhelming. And she'd stop and wipe her eyes and keep going. And she told the story when they pulled up to Auschwitz. They'd been in this train with a bucket for toileting for how many people, and there was people sick and dying. It's just a horrendous story. And she's, all we wanted to do was to desperately get out of this carriage. And when it pulled up in Auschwitz, and soldiers walking to and fro, and Alsatian dogs barking, and the smell of death, she said, all we wanted to do was to stay on this carriage. And they were forced out of this carriage, and they were told to line up. And this soldier came and announced that men this way, women and children this way. And she said her father was let off, and she ran. She'd never sort of been apart from her father, and she ran after her father. And because this soldier had hit him with the butt of his gun, and she ran up and hit the soldier, hit her, and said, "Get back." And she went back. And this, her 12-year-old brother said to her, "Which way will I go?" Now, he's a 12-year-old, right? But he'd had his bar mitzvah, so he's a man. And she said, "You go," this is his oldest, says, "You go with your mum." And she said, with those words, I condemned him to death. It was a sad story, incredible sad story. And she sort of, I went up to her later and I said, "I want you to know how much your story meant." It was just absolutely wonderful. And I shared with her. And I felt they sort of had this kind of fathering sort of, I just wanted to tuck her under my arm and bring her home. "I'll look after you," sort of. And she said, "Are you a Jew?" And I said, No, I'm a Christian." She said, "Your words even mean more to me." And we just had this lovely little chat. Just a delightful lady. I said, "Why do you do this?" And she says, "I don't want anybody to forget what we went through." But that story is just to share with you, this idea that there's a marker, he's now a man, right? We don't have that. We don't really have that. When is a boy a man? When he's 18? Well, when I was a boy, it was 21. 21, you got the keys of the house. We'd left home years ago, But it was this 18 that you can die for your country at 18. You can legally drink. They've been drinking since they were 12, We really don't have, and I think we miss that. And there's some schools now in South Australia who are setting up programs for boys where they take them out they're camping. And it's not circumcision or anything ridiculous like that, but they actually do a little ceremony where they train and sort of go through what it is to be a man. And I'd love to think that as a church we could think around that as families. What is it to be a man? What are we teaching our kids? What's a man look like today? What's a woman look like? So I don't think we do that well. When are you a man? Hey, that was... Yeah. Okay. I get a bit excited about that. Okay, kids are going to hear about God all over. If you don't put your own spot with your own values, they'll absorb. So that suggests you and I get sharp about our own values. What's important to us that we want to hang on. Right? And remember, Jesus said to the Pharisees, he said, "You guys," he said, "you polish your cups and you collect your mint and you pay tithe on your herbs. That's terrific. But what about justice and mercy and self-control?" So he said, these are the values you should be able to. So you don't need to say, "Hey, what am I really going to value and what do I want to pass on?" Number 2, help them believe. And I commend this verse to you. "These things are written that you might know that Jesus is the Christ, and that by believing you may have life in his name." So every time you read the Gospel of John, every time you read a story, look for those 2 things, because John wrote that. By the way, John was about 95 when he wrote his Gospel. He was he was about 90, somewhere in his late middle 90s. And most probably the last book to be written of the Old Testament. And why he wrote it? Because those 2 things. And he was writing, I think, to the second generation. A lot of the first generation had moved on. They were all dying off. And he says, "Hey, what about the second generation?" Real quick, if you read the book of John, in the other Gospels, there's miracles where Jesus touched. In the book of John, hardly any. A lot of Jesus' miracles in the book of John were done at a distance. Pool of Bethesda over a kilometre away. Reminding people that the sheer presence of Jesus isn't necessary to receive his blessing. It's done at a distance. His word is as good as his touch. It's an exciting book. Okay, here's a little statement. My wife and I try to help our daughters see that God is somehow here with us. We look for his presence in the concrete, sensory ways that we experience life. Watching hummingbirds at a feeder, looking at Mars through a telescope, seeing the miracles of nature, observing these helps kids get excited about the world around them. It nurtures their sense of wonder and ultimately, I think, their belief in God. So belief doesn't come. Well, it'll just happen by default. We need to be immersed in it. Number 3, I think it's okay if we don't have all the answers. It's okay. We can say, "Hey, not sure about that, honey. Let's think about that together." Right? We don't have to have it all polished up. It's okay sometimes to say, "Gee, I'm not quite sure, and let's figure this out." Number 4, use daily events to teach. This is one that I personally am excited about. Big ideas don't always require big actions. You can demonstrate that spiritually is a part of everyday life by incorporating ordinary actions and words. Remember the first verse that we share with you. Teach your kids these things when you wake up, when you lie down, in every part of your life. Right? That was the command given to the children of Israel, parents, their kids. You and I, as traditional Christian Adventists, for those Seventh-day Adventist Christians, and if you've come from another traditional faith, most probably in your faith you have this idea of family worship. And I grew up in a family where family worship was very important. And my dad and mum said it's family worship time. Right? That was great. That was great. We treasured that. And there's some benefits I'm going to show you in having regular times then. But for some kids it can be pretty heavy, and it always sort of rushed, and it's tough. And I heard this story about these two kids. Dad said, it's time for family worship. And these two brothers come down the stairs, and one brother mutters to the other, SOS. And Dad said, what was that, son? No, nothing, Dad. No, you said something. What was it? No, Dad. Come on, son. What was it? SOS. What does that mean? Same old stuff. Same old stuff. I love the verse where it says, where David says, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. Don't you love that? I was glad when they said unto me. For a lot of kids, I was sad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. You know, it's tough. And for some kids, church stuff can be tough, sometimes because it's the way it's presented. It's heavy. It's authoritarian or something. And the greatest dream I have is for mum and dads to use everyday life stuff. Because you think of Jesus. Now he's teaching, he says, he says, check the sower out there. Now you watch as he sows. He said, I don't see some seed planted some seeds on the thistles there, and some, now watch now, okay, look, good soil. And he paints this picture. So it is with life. And he says, see the shepherd out there? He says, I'm the good shepherd. It's me. And the shepherd's at the door to the gatefold. You've got to remember the story. In summertime, wintertime, in the little villages where Jesus was working, the shepherds would bring their sheep. They go out to the daytime to surround and bring them in at night time into a communal shepherd fold. And they would pay a kind of a caretaker to care for the sheep. The shepherds would go home in the morning. They'd come and call for their sheep, which is strange to us because any shepherds that we know drives a four-wheel drive or a helicopter. Okay, and they'd call the sheep, and the sheep would follow them, and they'd wander off and go to the paddock and bring them back. So he says, I'm the sheepfold. I'm the care of the sheep. Well, then he painted another picture. He says, I'm the door of the sheep. In summertime, the shepherds wouldn't bring them back at night time. They'd take them out further because it was dry and they're trying to get grass. And they would get rocks and build 3/4 wall, right, for the sheep, put them in, and then they would lie across the gateway. They were the door. And Jesus said, any person who comes in not via the door but over the wall is obviously a thief and a robber. Here's this fabulous picture. Jesus takes this sheep thing that all the pieces, hey, it's me. And he used all sorts of stories. So when you're driving your kids to school, look at that fire engine. It puts out those fires. Yeah. That's a bit like life. And when you see the guy slam on his brakes and go over the red light, grab a chance to say something about life and spiritual life. When you're having your Weet-Bix and you're so good, you up and go, grab the chance. And as we look for all little occasions, not this sort of one time where this is now worship, we're going to have family worship. It's cool, do that, but right through daily life. Grab every opportunity you can. Instill an appreciation of nature. Nature is a great place to find a tangible picture of God. Neifert, the psychologist, kids learn with all their senses. They love to pick up a rock or jump in a puddle or chase a butterfly, don't they? Love running around the mud, then coming inside. Kids love that stuff. Help your child to see nature as something sacred by demonstrating your own love and respect for it. Introduce them to the idea that Earth is a gift and that our survival depends upon the survival of the planet. So it was a good point they made. Number 6 is involve them. Kids get a sense of spirituality by being involved, and there are many opportunities to engage children. One parent wrote, music is definitely one way we do that. We play a lot of Jewish music in the car and in our home. It's a conscious decision to try to make our traditions a part of everyday lives. When kids come to services, they're more apt to participate if they're familiar with the songs. We know that. And for what it was, Karen and I did a lot of good things, a lot of crazy things, but one of the things we loved doing for our kids was getting them involved in this kind of time of family worship that we call it. And so we actually decided, instead of us doing this, let the kids do it. They're only little tackers, what are they, 5 or 6 or something, is we actually wrote a roster on the fridge: Mum, Dad, Kelly, Jaith. Mum, Dad, and it shares the load too. You know, he used to dream up stuff. And I remember Jaith, my son, one day comes in, he looks on the fridge and he says, "Oh, it's my time for worship." And he races down to the room, you know, there's silent, and he comes out and he had a little program. We had to sing a song and read a story, and Dad told us, but it's all written down. This little family ritual. We supplied a model for them. And we'd have little quizzes and all sorts of crazy stuff, you know. I remember one time we had our neighbours come who weren't, I don't know, a Christian. They had a Christian background, and we invited them over for tea. And we said, "Look, we have this little tradition in our family, a little bit of family time. You're welcome to stay." "Yeah, that'd be fine, you know." And so we said, "All right, let's do some singing. What song will we sing, you know?" So we choose this song, and I forget whether it was Kelly or Jaith, but he said, and I forget our neighbours' names. It was Kelly, was it? They said, "So-and-so, no, they aren't singing the song." You know, how does you like, right out loud, they're not singing the song. And the neighbour, bless him, he must have known the song from Sunday. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry," and he sang along with the song, and it was wonderful. But they were involved. They owned it. And it's just a neat thing to remember, and I think it was a great thing. Okay, this is what I love, tell stories. And I love this verse. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything without using a parable. I'm sorry, I didn't use a parable this morning. Yeah. Jesus taught in parables. There was once upon a time there was a man walking along. It's a story. How we should be good neighbours, Jesus. What's that like? Well, once upon a time there was a man, you know. Behold, a certain man had 2 sons. Family loves stories. You watch you people at church. Pastor tells a kid's story. All the adults sit up and finish the story, they sit down and colour in. No, hang on, let you just spin. We love this chair's Mark. Whoa, is there brakes on this? We love a story. Yeah, we love a story. So try and dream up a story. And we find our granddaughters love stories about when we were kids. And my nickname is Bar. I didn't want Par or Pop, so I said, and her nickname was Emmy Bear, so it was Bar. I said, "Bar, tell me a story when you were a child." They love those kind of stories when we were kids. Tell them stories, okay? And just let it live. Here's one that's really important, build on family traditions. Spirituality not only connects us to the divine, it also connects us to each other and to the past. Here's a statement by parents. If you're raising your child in the same spiritual tradition that you were raised in, be sure he knows that he's carrying on family rituals that were passed along by his grandparents and even great-grandparents. There's a neat book, and I don't know whether we referred to it when he did our marriage seminar last time we were here, but it's by John Gottman, Dr. John Gottman. He's recognised, he's a Jew, fascinating, funny guy, but he and his wife, Julie, I just did a seminar in Brisbane 2 weeks ago with them. He attended a happiness conference in Sydney 2 years ago. There was 2,000 people at this happiness conference. Isn't that fascinating? And he did a study. John Gottman is now recognised as one of the guys in marriage and family. Just unbelievable. And so many people quote his work. He's readily recognised as one of the guys. And I was reading his book in Baltimore. I picked up a book, and he said this in his book. He said, "You give me 15 minutes with any couple and I'll predict with a 91% accuracy whether they'll divorce or not." Now, I don't know about you, when I first heard that, I thought, "Oh, rubbish, bollocks." That can't be true. But the more I know this guy, he's unbelievable. And he says, research is clear as a bell. He says, you give, and he'll watch a couple in conflict and he'll predict with a 91% accuracy whether they'll divorce or not. And in his book, he shares what he looks for. What sort of things does he look for? Then he gives 7 things, the kind of antidotes, and maybe we can share it with you. I know it's fabulous stuff. Might have done a bit last time, I don't know. But one of the things tonight, why do I tell you that? One of the things that he shows, because he talks about masters of marriage and disasters of marriage. Disaster marriages mastered. And one of the things that masters do, good marriages do, is that they recognise family traditions. And he says, we as a culture have certain traditions, and the Jewish people, of course, have fabulous traditions, really fascinating ones. Yeah, the whole bar mitzvah and all sorts of ceremonies and candles and opening Sabbath, and every Friday night this John Gottman sings to his wife an opening Sabbath song, and he says, I get into tears every time I do it. And I think, brave boy. I don't think Carol would want to hear me. I don't think Carol would have a really good Sabbath if I sang to and open it. Pretty tough Sabbath, eh? Yeah, but plenty of tears. Give me a break. But they got these traditions, and he says, we have Christmas traditions and Easter traditions. Also families have traditions. And again, when our kids were small, Friday night was a bit of a special night, and so our kids used to love doing the candle thing. So they'd buy those little candles that float in water. They especially loved those because they moved around. So it had to be dark, didn't it? I mean, this is serious dark. So they'd pull out all the blinds, shut all the doors. If there's any light coming under the door, out comes, what do you call those sausage things? The door socks, and you put towels under the doors. It had to be pitch black, and they'd light these little candles. And sometimes I'd say to Carol, T's here somewhere, but I don't know where it is. And there's my spud. It's just black. They loved that. And that went on for ages, those little traditions. And sometimes we think, this doesn't count for us. It's a bit of a pest. No. The research is clear as a bell, right? Those little things that we do are really, really valuable things. I remember reading this interesting story. I was watching our time. This father, every year, didn't have a lot of money, but he and his wife saved to take their 4 teenage boys to the snow. And they go snow skiing every year, and they'd scrimp and save to take their boys to the snow. And he describes how when he was going through those years, his mates would come up and say, hey, Bob, have a look at this new car. Or, hey, Bob, come and have a look at the home extension. Mate, cool, have a look at the pool. And he says he just would love to have added to his house or had a new car, bought a pool, but no, they couldn't afford it. They went to the snow. And when his boys were in their early 20s, he said he was reflecting one day, and in fact all the boys were sitting there now with their partners or girlfriends, and they're all watching the old video clips of the snow trips and laughing. And he said some of his friends turned up, and they said to him, what's going on here, Bob? He said, look at your kids. Here they all are, all sitting around here together. He said, I've got no idea where my kids are. And a number of these fathers said to him the same, and he said he reflected on, he said, as a family, they'd made that a little yearly family tradition of going to the snow together. Right? And while this is a little thing, how valuable it was. It became this kind of a marker of the family. So look for ways that you can have traditions as a family. Build traditions with your family and realise they're really significant. And it's neat if you can tie them into some kind of spiritual component. So if the Adventist family Friday nights can be a bit special. Okay. Nearly done. Number 9, show them your spirituality. How we live and what we make time for speaks volumes to kids about what's important. Let your children know that spirituality is important to you and it will become important to them as well. You can do that by talking to kids about your own religious beliefs and living them out in everyday life, as one parent said. So we need to show them. Remember James says, show me your faith. Show me your faith. Let me have a look at it and see what it looks like. So we can all have it up here, but it's got to be expressed out, and that's for our kids. And number 10, worship together as a family. It says, although a formal religious education is important, schools and churches can teach kids only a small portion of what they need to know. The responsibility for creating spiritual, moral people lies primarily with mums and dads. You need to be proactive about it in your everyday life. And we mentioned at the start being intentional. We just don't do this by default. Right? Faith development doesn't come by accident. Morals and values don't come just by, maybe it'll seep through. It does, but something we've got to be intentional about this, okay? So worship, what you're doing today here, church, fabulous, okay? Don't underestimate the value of what you're doing here every Sabbath morning, because that's tradition. It's tradition that you're establishing. It's tradition in a spiritual setting. It's shared with adults. You've got all the components of a really neat thing happening here for the kids. So keep doing it, whatever you do. And that leads into the next one, and that is make them part of a community. So we've said that some people may see church as a building where you go to hear a sermon and then go home, but the biblical concept of church is a community. Daniel, that's exactly what you said at the start of church today. Okay? Every Sabbath after worship, we'll hang out or have lunch with various members of our church. That's when my children experience the joy and the love of God. Families who don't spend time with their congregations really miss out. Another quote by parents. And I think this fellowship lunch, we sometimes, it's hard work, but how incredibly valuable and important. So making them a part of the community. Finally, last one, make it fun. I was glad when they said to me, let's go to the house of the Lord, instead of I was sad. Encourage your grade schooler to draw a portrait of God, write his own story about how the world came to be, or simply imagine what heaven looks like. Together act out plays or put on a puppet show based on creation stories of your own spiritual themes. So someone wrote, and I love this one, above all, do what spiritual people have done for centuries, sing and dance. I'm interested in, sometimes some of our older people, bless them, and I know Greg's getting very close. No, it's okay, Greg, getting close then. Church for some people is a bit, you've got this idea that holiness is quietness. So if you're going to be holy, you're going to be quiet. Then you read in the Psalms where it says, praise God with loud clashing cymbals. Yes, loud clashing cymbals, And you read the description of worship in heaven and the others singing and praise. And I think God can cope with noise. And the Jews in King David's time had a fascinating ceremony. At night time, they would light these huge menorah, the big candles, and they'd go round and round the sanctuary, the temple, singing psalms. They'd have choirs out on the hills with palm branches and flares, and the priests would sing, and the choirs then what they call antiphon. A lot of the psalms are antiphonal songs, that is, they're songs of response. And the priests and all their singers and trumpeters would sing. This is, they're led by trumpets. They would sing, and then the groups up on the hills would sing. And this goes on all night. Now, when did you and I last have night church? And the neighbours may think we're a little strange if we walk in with palm branches singing and trumpets and stuff. Let's not do that, because we can't afford to take that culture back then and put it here. But we do need to ask ourselves, how can we kind of flesh out in some way our faith and make it alive and electric, make it fun? We've got this, I just got my own personal feelings about it. I remember good old preachers say sermonettes for Christianettes. We've got to have the good long 35-minute sermon. No, I'm not so sure about that. We're going to mix it up a bit, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be alive. And I'd love to encourage you, even your family worships when you're at home, try and make it fun. Do some daggy stuff. And it's all right, okay, now it's time for family worship. This is serious stuff, so let's have this book reading from Revelation. The kids will go, it's fun. Get them to do it and have some fun. Do some dancing in the rain. Yeah, great stuff. That'd be fun. I mentioned I mentioned this, the story of Susanna Wesley in church today. She's an amazing woman. And I think she had some powerful things to say about raising kids. And John and Charles attest to me, but every week she would assign a certain period of time, an hour of time actually, to meet with each of her kids, to encourage them, to exhort them and to urge them, as it says there in Ephesians. She had 10 kids, 9 others that died, sadly. Imagine the grief. Right? But she spent each week at least 1 hour with each of the kids to encourage them, to journey with them. Fabulous. I don't know how she did, but she spent an hour every day at the start of the day with God. Bless her. Right? Powerful. But she had a huge influence on her kids. And notice what she says. This is her words. Help me, Lord, to remember that religion is not to be confined to the church, nor exercised only in prayer and meditation, but that everywhere I am in thy presence. Isn't that cool? Which takes us back to our first text. It says, share these with your kids, these commandments that I've given you, when you wake up, when you go to sleep, when you're walking around in your everyday life. And let them see pictures of God that are alive, that are electric, and make him very special. Thanks for your time. Hope that's been helpful. Let's just pray, shall we, Daniel? We conclude with a prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for inviting us to pass it on. And you've given us this responsibility. You haven't taken it on board. You've asked us to pass it on to our children. And Lord, we have a deep love for you, and we treasure what we value that you've taught us about respect and honour and love and humility and grace and decency and kindness and respect and mercy and all those attributes that we just see so important. We desperately want our kids to have those. Lord, bless us in our journey. We're not always going to get it right, but we want to have a good crack at it. So give us good wisdom. Help us, Lord, to be intentional. Help us to go after this with energy, to fight for our kids in the right way. Be prepared to stand when it's important to do so, and be elastic when it's also important to do so. Help us, Lord, to journey well and do it together. We can't afford to think this is our solo journey. We do this together. We thank you, Lord, for this community at Mile End. We pray, Lord, as they journey this together with all those fabulous kids, that you will bless them. And may they sense your presence in a very, very special way. Now we're going to split and go our separate ways. We look forward to doing so in the sense and knowledge that you are with us still and that you're blessing our lives. For Jesus' sake. Amen. Thank you, guys, and God's blessings.
Let me do a bit of background. Thanks for the question.
John Gottman set up this, what I call it, love lab, which sounds dodgy, but what he did, he had a lab. No, seriously, he had this little unit in Seattle. Looks out over the bay. If you've been to Seattle, it's a beautiful city, cold, but just fabulous. And he set up this little unit and he invited couples to come look, because what he said is he started off with another friend. And they had he said, usually when you do doctoral studies or you do research, you have a proposal that you establish, then you work to that proposal. He said, we had nothing. We just desperately want to know, why do couples survive and some don't? That's all we wanted to know. So out of hunch, they got these couples in because he'd noticed that when he got stressed, your body reacts to it, and they'd sort of done some preliminary stuff. And so what they did, they set up this unit and invited couples to come in and live there for the weekend. And they'd bring in their crocheting and newspapers. That was the man brought the crocheting. He'd get these couples in, they'd bring their pet dog and they'd live this unit. But they knew that there were 3 cameras, video cameras, on them the whole time, from 9 in the morning to 9 at night, except bathroom break. He also had sweat measures on them, because when you and I are nervous, what do? Usually sweat. He had blood pressure, pulse, heartbeat. He had blood oxygen levels that he measured. This guy had everything. And he had these measures to take them on their fingers and get their pulse rate. And when you set it at 100, because normal pulse rate was about 64, something, whatever, but he said 100 is where you know you're stressed. And he put a little alarm on. And if it got to 100, oh, thank you, he'd just take that off. So what he did, he recorded these couples, and he had hundreds and hundreds, seriously, over a number of 15, 20 years. He had thousands of hours, and he just watched this stuff. And every few years, he'd track the couples down and find out where they're up to in their relationship. Right? So what he was able to do was, he was able to track all these couples who survived and those who didn't, and then he'd go back and just watch this stuff. He had people who were skilled in reading facial expressions. A raised eye can mean something, and a frown can mean something. And they've got recognised measures now for that. So if you and I sit down in front of these people, they'll tell us what we're feeling, all sorts. And he did this huge study. And he said, look, and that's what he says, look, he says, now I can tell you what is going to help you survive and what's going to thrive based on those studies. It's not intuition, it's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of analysis of these couples. And he's discovered that there's 3 or 4 basic types of couples that are different. For example, I've got all day on this, guys, be careful. I'll keep it short. For instance, there's conflictual couples. They're the sort of couples where you and I think, how do those people survive? We hear them before we see them. They're shouting and yelling at each other, and we think they're always fighting. How do they survive? He says, what we forget is that they're just passionate people. And he said, they're passionate at everything, and they argue and fight and get in there and have a good old go at everything. You should see them at home. He said, you shouldn't, maybe you shouldn't. They're passionate love makers. They're passionate about green. They're passionate about their kids. And he said, there's a formula. It's clear as a bell. It's 5 to 1. He says, whatever type you are, because there's the conflict avoidant couple who just don't fight. No, we just work it through, and they don't address any conflict. And you think, how do they survive? Because we often measure couples by when they fight. Because the key question is asked, what do you like when you're not fighting? Because that's the true measure. Right? And he says what we find is that these couples who they don't do much conflict, you think they're not going to survive. But he said all the successful couples have discovered, but unconscious, that there's a formula, 5 to 1. And he said he proved it hundreds of times, right across, that smart couples know that for every negative you need 5 positive. There's all sorts of stuff. But real quick, harsh starter. When you and I start off an argument harshly, it'll finish harshly no matter how much nice stuff we do in between. Right? Next thing that we look for, he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the 4 horsemen. Right? Criticism, when we criticise our partner. Right? Criticism, you and I can have a complaint about our partner. Right? Carol's got heaps of complaints about me. Right? I don't measure up, I don't do it right. But we've learned that we can't afford to criticise. Criticise is when we add a bit of character assassination. Oh, you're so much like your father. You know. Oh, you're so much like your mother. Oh, you are so useless. You are so hopeless. Right? That's criticism where we can't. And contempt is the same. That's the next horseman, which is the worst of the 4 horsemen, because it conveys a sense of disgust. Right? And we convey contempt without any words. We just roll our eyes and we let our partner know you were so hopeless, you were so stupid, you'll never amount to anything. Right? So criticism, contempt, defensive,ness. That's a man thing. In 85% of marriages, it's the man who gets defensive. Me? No, why would it be? Not me. Right? And stonewalling is the next horseman, where that's where we say, oh, I'm out here, hang this, and I get up and walk out of the room, or I switch the telly on and do some feral flicking, or I read the TAV results. And I just let my partner know, you can rave on all you like, I'm just not interested. Right, so they're things he looks for: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling. Generally in relationships, it's the woman who's at risk of being critical. She goes after the relationship. Men, if you hear your partner say, I care about this relationship more than you do, don't argue, she's most probably right. Right? Remember our comment this morning? Women are more relational generally. Men, now this relationship stuff's too hard to work. If I don't talk about it, it'll go away. You know. I reckon for men, there's some really scary words. We need to talk. That just fears that, that's scary stuff. Run amok, because we don't know what to do with that stuff. Okay. So criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling. It's the men who stonewall, generally because of what we call flooding. What he discovered, remember it's the sweat measures and all that stuff? Men react higher and longer than women in conflict. Their heartbeat goes higher, blood pressure goes up, but it stays longer. Right? So men tend to react physically about that stuff, so that's mostly why they avoid it. Fascinating stuff, right? And then there's a whole lot of others we don't have time, but fun stuff. Then he talks about what you and I can do. Maybe we can do a workshop on that one day that we can share with you. There's some key things that we can do. As a young bloke, I used to hear pastors say, when you're married, you've got to work at your marriage, and I thought, oh, rubbish. Why would you work at your marriage? If you fall in love with this woman, you happen. I've discovered you've got to work at your marriage, But now I know what to do. For years I didn't know what to do. I thought if I bring her flowers, that'd work. Ding, she get some points out of that. If I mow the lawn, maybe help with the dishes. I was never really sure, Now I know what to do. Because here's some things you can do. And he comes up with 7 things. And one of them, interesting enough, is build a shared culture. Build a shared culture. That's number 7. Build a shared culture as married couples. So I hope you're building some shared cultures. Right? Every time you have a birth, man, you know what I mean? Every time you have a birth as a couple, celebrate in some nifty way. Plant a tree, have a cake, bring in the neighbourhood and have a barbecue. Do this sort of cultural thing. Find a reason. Anything. Buy a new car, have a party. Or you buy a new car, you can't afford a party. But you know what I mean? Just find things to celebrate and build a family culture, a marriage culture. Hey, I can go all day on this, Dan. Sorry, but it's fun stuff. It really is. If you want the book, grab the book. It's 7 Principles for Making Your Marriage Work by John Gottman. It's about $20. Grab it. It's got all sorts of exercise. Fabulous book. 7 Principles for Making. John Gottman, Gottman. Jot it down. He's also got The Marriage Cure. That's good value. Describes different types of marriages, what to do. It's really neat stuff, guys. And let me show you. If I was going into business, right? If Carol and I were setting up a business, and someone said to us, look, after 20 years of research, if you guys do these 6 things, it's going to guarantee that you're going to lose your business. I'd want to know what they are. And if I know from thorough research that here's 6 things that are going to guarantee you're going to mess up your marriage, I want to know what they are. And the exciting things for me is that it's thorough, scientific-based research. And that's very valuable. 7 principles to make a marriage work. Yeah.
You're referring to some things that you can do with kid traditions at home. Is it bad to say change those traditions over time as kids grow? Teenagers get bored or kids get distracted, and the question I guess I'm asking is there some point where you should still go ahead with things even when it's not appreciated because it works? Or at those moments when, say, a child is getting bored or sick of it, should we fear that they will rebel, or should we actually, keep working through it and find other ways to?
Thank you. It's a good question. Just in case you didn't hear, the question was, if I've got it right, should we, even if we've got a tradition or something that we do as a family, but we're noticing that our teenagers are losing interest in or something, should we sustain it because it's traditional, or should we adapt and change? Good question. And I think that's going to depend a bit on the personality of the kids and what the tradition is in some way. If it's dated and no longer has that kind of meaning for the kids, I think we can change it. But what we could do is, what's the core thing we want to hang on to, and can we address that in a new way? So that we do, the kids change, our culture changes a bit, new ways, the technical age and all the rest of it. I think if I had my kids now, I'd be using, say, an iPad or something in my worships, I'd try and incorporate some kind of fresh stuff, but what's the core values that I'm not going to let go? So I may change the style of doing it, but I still want to hang on to the core stuff that I'm trying to convey. Does that make sense? So I've got to try and find fresh ways of doing that, but I don't let go. But I think you're right, some things are worth sustaining, but is it the way we're doing it or what we want to get across? Yeah, sometimes they're a bit hard to split, but I appreciate your question. Okay, one more.
You were talking about mentoring other people's kids, and I've been sitting here thinking about that. And I think that is so important. From my own experience with my daughter, who was mentored by one of the guys at church, and there were many things that happened over the time at church. One of them was, he used to send them letters when he'd go on holidays, he would postcards and stuff, but yeah, he just always kept in contact with us at church, away from church and that. And we had a Father's Day there one day, and they asked all the males to go down the front. Anyway, after that they had a song, and then they asked all the kids to come and stand by their fathers. So I'm expecting 2 girls to come and stand by me, but only one turned up. The other one stood next to his other guy. And he was in tears over it all. But later on, my daughter was hurt very badly by the church and then by the conference and wants nothing to do with the Adventist church. But I think the fact that this guy has a mentor has kept her off the top.
Yes. Thank you, mate. Thank you for sharing that, Warren. Really appreciate it, seriously. And you're right. I think you're right. And I sense we've got to be real here. One of the challenges for us as a church is our society and its current appropriate but challenging emphasis on rights and the whole issue of abuse and inappropriate touch and all the rest of it. And I remember as a chaplain, I was a chaplain for a school for 3 years, and all these little guys in kindergarten, first class, just gorgeous little kids, and it was recess, and they'd come racing down to I was out, in the playground, pass the Traff, and they'd grab on, and 10 kids hanging off me and stuff, and unconsciously I'd pick this little kid up, hang on, put her back down, and I think, to be really honest, I'm torn in my feelings because I know we must protect our kids. Sadly, there's some people out there that just horrify me. We're aware of that, but I'm also conscious of the fact that we are so nervous about that are we at risk for our kids not connecting? We talk about desperate need of connections, but we've got to be so protective. It's tenuous ground. But we can't afford to, if we've got appropriate touch, we've got men in our church who know about that, who are careful about boundaries, but can be there for the kids emotionally. What a tremendous skill. What a tremendous thing in your case in point with your daughter. I remember this really sad story about these two kids who were brought into a courtroom. There was a decision about them, who they wanted to live with their mum and dad who were divorcing. And this policeman brought in these two kids, fairly young kids, and the judge looked down at these kids in a soft voice and said, would you like to go and stand beside which parent you'd like to be with? And these two little kids sort of paused, and then they slowly walked towards their mother, then they came back, and they walked towards their dad, and then they came back, and then they stood beside the policeman and held his hand. And I thought, isn't that sad? Here's this policeman who'd spent this short time with his kids and somehow conveyed that it was safe and it was okay.